देवाय धीमहि तन्नः सर्वः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः।
Om Shri Sai Ram. Welcome, dear brothers and sisters, to this yet another satsang session in this month of April when we observe Aradhana Day. This is the second part of this satsang wherein we are reflecting about what Bhagawan means to us, what we should do, how we should celebrate this Aradhana Day. The title is how we can feel the presence, how we can experience Sai Sannidhi during Aradhana Day. And every time the Aradhana Day comes, it brings back so many memories. And in the previous session, all of us, Brother Prem from the Media Center, Brother Amey and Brother Giridhar from the Sri Sathya Sai Center for Human Values, we went back to those days when we were lost looking at the beatific, bewitching form of Bhagawan. We shared with you how much we miss his form during this time. But at the same time, we also shared with you how he has left for us such amazing gifts, gifts which would have never happened if he had not decided to take that lovely form, Sri Sathya Sai. In the last session, we said one phenomenal gift that he has given us, which has transformed our lives, which has beautified our lives, is the name and the form. The name Sri Sathya Sai and the beautiful form Sri Sathya Sai Baba. Today, we will move on. There are so many gifts he has given. We will move on to the next gift.
So the second gift that we thought when we contemplated upon what is the legacy of Bhagavan that he has left behind for us, the second jewel in our treasure chest is his charitra, is his life. And when we talk about his life, it consists of obviously the historical references, the history. And when we mean by history, probably for the first time, it actually means his story.
Yes.
Right? And the second part is what are the learnings for us in his life? Now, one may ask the question, it is a life that was beautiful. It was probably one of the greatest lives. But what am I going to get out of contemplating on a bunch of historical figures, like what happened in 1950s or in 1960s? How does that help me today in the 21st century? Right? So we will kind of delve a little bit and we will investigate as to why just the listening of Swami's Charitra can be a very transformative experience for all times to come.
Yes.
Absolutely, because when you talk about the gift that Swami has given, we spoke about the name and the form that he has assumed. What he did with that name and the form is equally important. One thing is, of course, to look at Swami's life and see in what way it is relevant to us in our everyday journey. That has its own merit, which we will try to delve into. But there is something about the charitra of the Lord itself. And I think Sanatana Dharma has always recognized that. Just that listening to imbibe just that Shravanam, right? And the most classic example of that is the Srimad Bhagavatam itself. Two aspects to Srimad Bhagavatam, which often I tend to recall whenever I'm reading or when we had the opportunity to speak about Swami's life as part of the Sathya to Sai series, is that first of all, who authored the Bhagavatam? Or what was the situation or scenario or mindset in which it was authored? Swami would often say, Sage Vyasa, the one who categorized the Vedas, the one who gave us so many Puranas, the one who brought to us so many Upanishads, he did not have peace of mind. With all his intellectual attainments, he did not have peace of mind, and finally, he's asked to write the Bhagavatam for his own peace of mind. And the other aspect of it is, we all know the story of Parikshit. Here is a king, extremely righteous, extremely knowledgeable, coming from a lineage that is definitely stellar lineage, admirable, and one could get jealous of that. Such a personality, due to turn of events, has 7 days to live. And he asks this question, what is the best way to use one's time? Right? 7 days I have, and that's all I have. How am I to make best use of this time?
Yes.
And to the scene comes Sukha Maharishi, and he says, you should listen to the Bhagavatam. Story of Sukha Maharishi is, remarkable in its own way, because here is Sukha Maharishi is supposed to be born a jnani. He's born a renunciant. He doesn't go through the balastavat and brahmacharya and all that. He's born and he walks away to the forest. That's the history of Sukha Maharishi. He's so detached from the world, and he comes and says, let me tell you the stories of the Lord. And even as he narrates them, he loses himself in bliss and he starts shedding tears. Now, that is the glory of the name. And whenever Swami speaks about the Bhagavatam, Swami would tell us, Parikshit was lucky. He knew he had 7 days. Swami says, are you sure of that? Can you be sure that you have 7 days to live? Yes. So Swami says, start now. And Swami would, another beautiful statement that Swami would say when he's talking about Bhagavatam, Swami would say, Bhagavatam vinandi, Bhagavatam vinte, Bhagavataru, Swami would say. Then he would say, which means if you listen to Bhagavatam, you will get better or you will progress in life. Swami would also add, Bhagavatam vinandi, Bhagavatam tinandi. He would say, consume Bhagavatam because it nourishes, and this is nourishment not merely for the body, but also for the spiritual journey. And I think that's why there's something fundamentally, essentially profound about listening to the Bhagavatam itself.
And by Bhagavatam, we mean the life story of the avatars, right?
Yes. Bhagavatam, in fact, constitutes the divine romance between the Bhakta and Bhagawan, as Swami would put it, which is really the reason why the avatar comes. The avatar's life is, in that sense, for the sake of the Bhaktas. Yes. And that particular reference that you gave, Brother Prem, Bhagavatam Vinandi, Bhagavatam Tinandi, Swami, in fact, uses an analogy very familiar to our mothers. Swami says that an individual may be resistant at the beginning to do the sadhana of Shravanam, that is to listen to the stories of the Lord. So, a baby in the lap of mother is only used to the milk of the mother. And the mother's endeavor is to slowly move the baby from only having mother's milk to the regular food that we have. In India, typically rice. And what a mother would do is take a little bit of cooked rice and mix it with milk and try to feed the baby. Initially, the baby rejects the rice,
Solid
because
food.
solid food it's not used to. It's only used to the sweetness of mother's milk. So when it rejects the rice, the mother does not give up. What she does is every day, little by little, she goes on feeding the child with milk rice. And eventually we all know what happens. Rice becomes our staple food. So in the same way, Bhagawan says for a sadhaka, it may be difficult in the initial days to be used to listening to the stories of the Lord. But whatever the difficulty may be, little by little, make it a habit to listen to the stories of the Lord every single day, and a time will come when you cannot live without listening to the glory and the story of Bhagavan. So we must get to that point.
Yes.
And one might wonder what is the result of listening to the Lord's glories. And Bhagavatam, in fact, describes this right in the beginning. It says that Narada, the celestial sage who is known to traverse all 3 worlds, he goes to the sacred bhumi of Vrindavan, which is Lord Krishna's playground. And when he reaches that place, he sees a young woman and 2 old men lying down, almost in their last moments. And he asks that lady, Amma, what can I do for you? And the lady introduces herself as Bhakti or devotion itself. And she says, these 2 old people that you see on my either side are Jnana and Vairagya.
My 2 sons.
her two sons.
Yeah.
So Narada is startled because the mother is so young and the two children are so old. So Mother Bhakti then continues to explain and say that all three of us were actually in our last moments. We were dissipating away when we landed in the sacred bhumi of Vrindavan. When we touched this sacred soil, there is so much bhakti in the soil that I became young, and hence you see me as a young lady. But still, nobody cares for my two children, Jnana and Vairagya. These are the words of Mother Bhakti. And Narada gives a promise to Bhakti that he will revive her two children. So he goes, does penance on Brahma, who eventually guides him to invoke the blessings of his own brothers, the Sanat Kumaras. Narada does penance and Sanat Kumaras appear. And as a solution to revive Jnana and Vairagya, they give Narada the Bhagavatam, which is eventually given to the great sage Vyasa. So in this way, Bhagavatam, listening to Bhagavan's Leelas, not only revives bhakti in our heart, but it also evokes Jnana and Vairagya, which is essential for a sadhaka to remain in union with his beloved.
Wow. In fact, as you mentioned about Bhakti, Jnana, Vairagya, I'm reminded of how in Sandhya Nivarini, even as Bhagavan is talking of very esoteric concept, Chidakasa, Chittakasa and everything, Swami comes down to the level of Bhakti, because ultimately the Bhakta asks, Swami, if all this is important, then why are we doing this Japa, Dhyana, Bhajan? Swami said, that is the starting point. Start from there. And very beautifully Swami says, Anurakti is the flower. Swami says, it starts with Anurakti. Anurakti is that affection for the Lord.
Attachment.
And Swami says that Anurakti will become the fruit of Bhakti. So Anurakti is the flower, Bhakti is the fruit, then Jnana, Swami says, is the ripening of that fruit. And Vairagya is that complete fruit. So this whole journey of first, with the name and form, you fall in love with the name, you fall in love with the form. And that's what it happens when an avatar comes. I think that's what en masse, people just want to see him. En masse, you want to just be in his presence. So that Anurakti happens. And with time, that Anurakti transforms into Bhakti. And slowly, I think Jnana and Vairagya begin unconsciously. It happens. Yeah, unravels within you. In fact, as you were mentioning this, so many stories come to mind. Let me share one that happened many years ago in the 70s in Orissa. I hail from a little town in Orissa, and there was this Balvikas guru, Mr. Chaudhary, who really trained all of us, and he was a very respected individual, very learned man, very talented person, and also a doctor. And every day in his house he would do bhajans. So one day, after the bhajan sessions concluded in the evening, suddenly there was this banging on the door, the rear door of the house. And when he opened the door, there was this lady of the house who lived in the next house. Yeah. And she was in a very, very terrible state. It's like someone had boxed her, so her eyes were dark and lips were, there were bruises all over the face. And she said, please allow me to stay here. I don't want to go back to my house. I don't want to go back to my house. And Mr. Chaudhary knew the situation. Basically, her husband every day would come home fully drunk. And after that would start this abuse, violence. They had two children, and it was a common thing for Mr. Chaudhary's family to listen to this shrieks and pains and cries every evening. But it was until then limited to that house. But I think this was a day when this lady could not take it anymore. In fact, every evening, it was not that this neighbor uncle, he did not come to the house. Every evening, the children, both these children, whatever they're doing till the evening, they would drop everything and go around in the township. Their mission will be to search father. Because he would be lying in some road, some street, somewhere. So he would be actually every day brought to the house. So on that day, when she was in that pitiable condition, Mr. Chaudhary went into the house And something happened to him. He just went to one of the rooms where there was Bhagawan's photograph. He plucked that photo from that wall, gave it to her, and he said, "You go back to your house. Now you're not going alone. You're going with Swami. Wow. Nothing will happen to you. Go back to your house." And after she went back, Mr. Chaudhary's children, they were putting their ears to the window to see, if the violence is getting any worse, what is going to happen. But fortunately, there was nothing. There was silence after that. And Mr. Chaudhary told this lady, "You ask your husband to see me tomorrow morning." And because, as I said, he was a very respected individual. So that person came to him the next morning. And the only thing Mr. Chaudhary did is listen to me. He gave him volume 1 of Satyam Shivam Sundaram and he said, "Start reading this." So morning he gave him. They used to go to office, 7 o'clock in the morning. Lunchtime when Mr. Chaudhary returned, this uncle was back. And he said, "Do you have one more volume? Do you have one more part?" Oh. Okay. He said, "Yeah." So he gave the second part. By the time he returned from the office at 5 o'clock, he said, "Can I read more? Do you have one more part?" He said, "Yes." So he gave the third volume of Satyam Shivam Sundaram. By the time it was night, he said, "I want to read more. Do you have one more?" So he gave the fourth part. And by the time it was next morning, 24 hours after this, he had read 4 volumes of Satyam Shivam Sundaram and he came to Mr. Chaudhary and he said, "I want to go to Parthi. Can you take me now? I want to go to Parthi." And they did come to Parthi. Mr. Chaudhary brought him to Parthi. And when he came to Prasanthi Nilayam, he would just sit in the sands. He would not, people, when Bhagawan goes to the interview room, people would go for a break, to ease themselves or, have a cup of coffee. He would never go. Just sit on the sands. And they thought they will stay for 2-3 days. They stay for 10 days because they cannot stay for any more longer. They return. And once he's back, when he was in Parthi, once he was back, no withdrawal symptoms. He was drinking for 20-25 years. No withdrawal symptoms. His life changed completely. And in fact, he's there even now. And let me tell you this. After that, few years after that, actually, this uncle got cancer. Because he had led such a life which had abused the body so much, he got cancer, but he did not go to the hospital. He was only in satsangam. In fact, after that, they moved to a house where the mandir, the samiti was attached to that house. So they would spend all their time in the samiti. This uncle did not go to any doctor. And he would only spend time in satsang and home remedies. Even now, almost is 35-40 years after that, he's still alive. He's still alive. He's still fine. And offered his life to Bhagawan, just attaching himself to the lotus feet and thinking about his charitra. That is how just this charitra of Bhagawan, as we are saying, reading Satyam Shivam Sundaram has resurrected that family. In fact, one of their children became a student also in Bhagawan's college.
So in fact, when we think about this, I think in the volume 2 of Satyam Shivam Sundaram, there is a chapter called Wounded Wings.
Yes.
Right? It starts with the story of Kalpagiri, one of the dacoits, who had committed a foul murder. And of course, the story is so beautiful, it can be in fact adapted into a movie. It's that dramatic. And eventually, as we know the story goes, he surrenders himself, he goes to the jail. And, just seeing him in the jail, everybody else is wondering, what did you do, man? To get into the jail? Because you seem to be an absolutely perfectly fine person. And he says, "I've been touched by the hand of God." And so he says, "What are you reading?" All the other inmates in the jail ask him, "What are you reading?" And he says, "I'm reading Satyam Shivam Sundaram." And he says, "We would also like to read." And see the fortune of all of those people, that they took up the reading of Satyam Shivam Sundaram. These are prisoners, these are convicts, who are in the jail, and they start reading. And one by one, Kasturi Garu writes in the book, one by one, Chengappa, his life transforms. And the best part of it is, Bhagawan starts to write letters to them.
Yes, I think that's amazing thing. Bhagawan directly corresponding.
So I think that is the power of charitra, isn't it? That you read his charitra and he will be forced to write to you. Oftentimes what happens, we write letters to Bhagawan and we wonder, "Swami, when are you going to respond?" Here is a case where Swami is telling, "You read my life, I will come to you." That one step of starting to read. So I think that is That is the great gift that he has given us, which is his life itself.
No, absolutely. In fact, everybody should go and read that chapter because it's so moving. The fact that the avatar of the age took out time to write letters to those individuals whom we condemn.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? And Swami would often tell about people like these. He said,
And if you read, it is not short letters. It's like long letters that Bhagawan has written. actually.
Exactly. And they would write to Swami saying, Swami, we don't have a picture of yours. Can you send us a picture of yours? And Swami would often say, it's just one moment of recklessness. And we have, consigned them as bad individuals for a life. We all are like that. Our life is strung with moments of
No, and
recklessness.
I think therein lies the hope that if someone like that heart can be touched and transformed,
Yes.
what about us?
Absolutely.
Surely there will be a difference in our lives, isn't it?
Right.
There is hope for us.
Yeah, there is hope for us.
There is a beautiful Chinnakatha, and like many Chinnakathas of Swami, it's the essential message dramatized and given in a manner that it kind of captures your imagination. Swami says in a discourse that there was this thief, and this thief had a son, and he was passing on his profession to the next generation. So he was teaching his son how do you
The intricate details of
how do
methodology.
you do burglary and how you don't get caught by the officials and police and all of that. So one of the instructions that this father, who was a thief, who was a burglar, who gave to his son is, you go anywhere and steal, go to any place, but don't go to that place where they will have this, Shamyana and Pandal and all that, and they'll be sitting and reading out the Bhagavatam. Never go near that place. So the son asked, what is this weird instruction you give me? What will happen if I go there? He said, don't even ask me. Don't go near that place. And then the story goes that this son, who later takes up his father's profession, is stealing in one particular house, and the police is after him. So he comes running and he finds that there's a group of people sitting and listening to something. So he goes and sits in that crowd, and then he realizes that this was the forbidden meeting that he was, cautioned about. And he sat there, and the Bhagavatam goes on, and he listens to it, and completely, his mind transforms. So he goes back, and he's not able to continue with that profession. So for the next few days, as we all know, Bhagavatam is done for 7 days. So he comes every day and completely transforms. Swami says, see, that is the glory of the charitra of the Lord. And when you look at Swami's life, the charitra, as you said, is historical. There are events, what Swami did in his childhood, the letter that Swami wrote to declare himself, the projects that Swami has done.
The wonderful miracles,
right.
the
Each one.
Kanyakumari, and
Absolutely.
from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, I think from the east to west, Swami treaded all over the country.
And the Bhagavatam is endless. There is this one simile that Swami gives in Bhagavatavani, the first chapter itself, before he starts about telling the story. Swami says, Bhagavatam, the story of Bhagawan is Bhagavatam, the story of Bhakta is Bhagavatam, the story of the relationship between them is Bhagavatam. He said, everything is Bhagavatam. So where does it start and where does it end? Swami says, you go and sit in front of the seashore, you sit on the beach. Can you count the waves? Swami says you can, but you start counting and you stop counting. The waves don't stop. So Swami says you start speaking about the Lord and you stop speaking. It doesn't complete the Bhagavatam, right? That's how endless and ananta, as they say, is the Bhagavatam. But the other aspect about Swami's charitra is that when you observe him as a person, his physically, the way he carried himself, there is like so much to learn from the way he carried himself.
Obviously, he said, just being with, living with God is true education. His life was his message.
Absolutely. Today, one of the fads, if we could put it that way, is minimalism. Right? In everything. Minimalistic living. They talk about it in architecture, they talk about it in dressing, they talk about it in lifestyle. But Swami started that way, way back. And not only was he living that every day, but he was, constantly calling out our attention to that. Because I recall, even as a young student, when you're sitting in front of Swami, saying Trai Vrindavan, where the interaction was, more intimate, and Swami could literally talk to us directly. Swami would constantly call our attention to some of the small things that he would do. You write a letter to Swami, Swami would look at it. Swami said, Daintra, 4 lines you've written, 1 full page you've used. So Swami would sit there and Swami would tear that page. Swami said, "This is for me."
Yes.
What you've written. The remaining Swami would give it
In my
back.
school
Swami
days, I
said, "You say
remember
next later."
I used to ensure that my the chit is only this much if I'm writing one line in my school days.
And then the other thing which I recall is, those very few special opportunities we had where we could, sit in Swami's presence when Swami is eating something, right? Swami would dine with us once or twice when we had that opportunity to see. Generally, what we would do is we would eat food and we would go and gargle the mouth and spit it out, right? Swami would never do that. Swami would take the water that is served for him, he would gargle and he would swallow. And Swami would tell us, see what Swami is doing, right? Because we are so dumb that we might even miss it, even though it is happening right in front of us. So Swami would say, see, this is why waste? Why waste at all? And it was a very beautiful episode which one of my classmates narrated. Of course, all of us are here from the hostel. We have these self-reliance departments in the hostel. The idea is whatever is required for the maintenance of the hostel, the kitchen work and the electrical works, everything is taken care of by the students and teachers. So there is this maintenance department which is in charge of the electrical and the plumbing work. The speciality of the maintenance department in Vrindavan is they're also in charge of the Trai Vrindavan.
Yes.
Right? So that's an added benefit of being a maintenance boy. So one of my classmates who was in that department, one day the teacher in charge comes and tells him that we need to change a tube light in Trai. So he was very happy. Swami was in Vrindavan. So just to enter Swami's mandir when Swami is there, it's a very special feeling. He goes there and to his surprise, the tube light that had to be changed was in Swami's room.
Wow.
Right? So they went right into Swami's room
And Swami was there.
at that moment, Swami wasn't there. So he looked around, that was first of all an opportunity to see that living space where Swami was living, right? Nothing at all. We had more belongings than Swami, right? Absolutely Spartan. He goes inside. And as they were fixing the tube light, Swami comes in.
Wow.
And Swami is standing there and looking at what they're doing. So Swami said, have you done? Is it working? And all that. So, even as they were doing that, Swami's fan was on and it was making a little bit of noise, right? So that teacher in charge prayed to Swami, Swami, can we change the fan also? We said, for what you came? You came for changing the light. That is done. Why are you asking about the fan? He said, Swami, it's making noise. It's working, right? Swami said, it's working. And for me, it is like Omkara. The noise that is making is just like Omkara. Swami said, literally like do what is least required, just live like, what is minimum requirement? That's minimalism, right? But we've seen so many such examples. I think each one of us will have some.
As you narrate this, I'm reminded of something that happened to a brother who had this chance to serve Bhagawan at close quarters. He got this opportunity to become Bhagawan's personal servitor suddenly. There was no one to guide him. The person who was serving before, his predecessor, suddenly left the scene. And so he had to figure out himself what are the things that he need to do for Bhagawan right from dawn till dusk. So, he was doing his own experiments to find out how to serve Bhagawan, how to serve the physical form. And he had remembered that Bhagawan writes. So, among the other things that he did, one day he thought, let me keep a notebook. So the next day, when he went to the room, when he would go when Bhagawan goes for darshan, then he saw that Swami has actually written something. So that was like a victory. Wow, I've done something that Swami likes. I kept a notebook, Swami has written, and so he checked the next day. Swami has written some more. Third day, Swami has written again something. But the third day, he saw that something funny, the way Bhagawan has written, because he has written in such a manner that Swami is using like every inch of the space, right from top till down. He's not leaving the margins. In fact, it was written in a manner that there is not even space for an ant to crawl between the gaps. That is how Bhagawan had written. So he thought, maybe Swami is thinking one book is there. Because he was a person, I have seen this brother's diary, he would write very luxuriously. He will write one page and he will leave one page, he would write his poems. So why is Swami writing like this? So he thought, I should keep some more books. And then Swami can feel that there is enough space.
the creator
Available for the
of
creator.
bamboo.
You can write easily and write luxuriously. So that's why he kept the notebooks. And he said after a few days when he checked, it is the same. Swami was writing the same way. See, this is something nobody would notice. They say no, the true character of a person is what he does when nobody is watching. So this is the kind of life that and we would never know if this brother who was serving Swami had not shared, we would never even know.
Yeah.
But this is how Bhagawan was living his daily life. He never told and called that brother also and showed, see, this is how I'm writing. Nothing. It was just an act. That is how he lived. And I think that is a very, very powerful lesson about when Swami says, my life is my message. Every time he would say that. The first World Conference, what is the message, Swami? Swami said, there is no other message. My life is my message. In fact, even the gold button, that the only ornament on Swami's body was the gold button. And this brother, he was telling me that for 13, 14 years, that chain that connects his buttons was broken. And Swami never allowed to replace. It's fine, it's working, it's fine, it's working, it's working. He never allowed.
Yeah.
Speaking about
so many
Swami's
such stories,
robes,
yes. Yeah.
there is one extraordinary moment that comes to my memory. This was early 2000s when the Gujarat earthquake happened, and Bhagawan had sent truckloads of relief material to Gujarat along with wonderful Sai brothers and sisters who went and served.
Swami personally sent Mr. Chiranjeev Rao Garu.
Yes,
Right?
From Prasanthi
Right.
Nilayam.
That was how much important
With very specific guidelines as to what he must do and everything. It is around that time Swami came for darshan like any other day, and there was something peculiar or strange rather about that darshan. It was evident that Swami was playing with his robe a little more than usual. Even while he was walking down, all the way from Purnachandra to the Sai Kulwant Hall, he made a quick round, and Swami used to sit outside in what we would call the Ganesh portico, where today Swami's Sannidhi is. Swami would sit on chair, and interact with the students and the teachers for about an hour or so. And even as he sat, this strange act was seen. That is, Swami was going on tugging at his robe. But after a while, when Swami got into a flow of speaking about a topic, and the robe was, of course, left alone, and there was a breeze, and the robe parted way to reveal Bhagawan's dhoti, the end part of his dhoti, and it was torn there. And Professor Anil Kumar, who was right next to Swami, he noticed that there was something wrong with the dhoti. Some of us seated in the front as well, and we were all looking at it, wondering, Ayo, what Swami is wearing? The dhoti is torn. And Swami, of course, noticed that immediately and said, Emira, em chustunaru, he said, what are you seeing? And he explained the situation and said that there are hundreds of children in Gujarat who were very well-to-do and some who were in difficult situation. All alike were rendered homeless because of the earthquake, and they were all on the streets, in the refugee camps and whatnot, in the rehabilitation centers, and they did not have good clothes to wear. So Swami said, how can I remain without doing anything? So I asked them to take all my robes and dhotis that were there, and he went to the detail of explaining that one dhoti of mine can make 2 skirts for small girls. So I told them to stitch them into skirts and distribute it to them. That way I gave all the good dhotis that I have. In fact, the message that we received even in the hostel from Swami was, you may give clothes to these people in need, but they must be good clothes. Yeah. Don't give them worn out and torn clothes. Give them good clothes, because they are people with dignity and they must be treated with such dignity. Yeah. So bring new clothes or good clothes at least. Wash them well and iron them well and give it to them. And Swami set the example for that. He gave all his dhotis and he was left with that dhoti which was torn a little bit at its base, And that was a sight that we can never forget.
And these are things we would never know, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I mean, how incredible it is that someone of the stature of Forget for a moment, let us keep his divinity aside, but just to consider the stature of Bhagwan Sri Sathya Sai Baba. In the year 2000, probably by then, every head of state has come and fallen at his feet. All the Bharat Ratnas and every known, celebrity has come and fallen at his feet. Okay, thousands of people are waiting for his darshan. Okay, and yet he feels that, let me wear this dhoti and go. Right? How incredible, what humility is that? I'm very quickly reminded of yet another very senior person, an IPS officer. He was telling that, he said at any given time in his career, he had at least 100,000 people under him. He was the head of the Andhra Pradesh police, and even some of the big corporations in the government. And when he was wondering, like he's so big, and all of these people who are at the top, they have that feeling of hierarchy. And he said when he came to see Swami for the first time, he had accompanied the chief minister, and the chief minister had just fallen flat in front of Swami, and like that is the kind of stature. And then as years rolled by, he comes to Swami more often, and then Swami calls him for an interview, and then Swami says, "Where is your mother?" He says, "Swami, she's over there." And the mother is old, and the mother is trying to make her way to the veranda, and Swami goes and holds her hand and pulls. And at that moment, he said, I could not take it. Because this is Bhagwan Sri Sathya Sai Baba, in front of whom the whole world, kind of prostrates. And he has the humility to go and hold an old lady and bring her to the room. He says that day it transformed his life, because he said every time he would go for any meeting, he will first go and meet the constables right down, and he would, drink tea with them and have food. And all the other people below him would say, "Sir, don't do this. Like don't break protocol." He said, "What protocol, man? These are the people who are doing things." And he said, "I always take that message, that act of Swami holding my mother's hand. He's God, right? He's the CEO of the Sathya Sai world, right? And he had to do that. That is the simplicity. And the other point that I wanted to kind of bring forth in front of our discussion was, when we look at the Kulwant Hall, I've seen people, first timers who come and they look at, whoa, this is like so grand. And the Prasanthi Nilayam, the Kulwant Hall, all of Swami's buildings look so grand. And one gets the feeling that, man, this person lived a pretty decent life, if not an opulent life. Even people who have respect, right? And a lot of people who want to trash, who just don't want to accept, they say, oh, Baba moved in a Mercedes and Baba had this and that and he had all the comforts, One should only go and see the truth. Yes. Because when we had an opportunity to go and clean up Swami's room in 2011 during Dasara time, while we see the great grand bhajan hall and the Kulwant hall, we were appalled to see Swami's bedroom, which Swami lived in for 43 years. From 1950, from the day of its inauguration up to 1993, in Prasanthi Nilayam. Yes. The most glorious part of Prasanthi Nilayam was the bhajan hall and the Kulwant hall. Yes. Because his room, it was shocking for us to see that, Swami occupied probably around 10 feet by 10 feet, maybe 6 feet by 10 feet. Was the the dimension of the room, right, Giridhar?
Yes, and it's very interesting to note whether it is the Prasanthi Mandir room of Swami or the Purna Chandra room of Bhagawan. Both of them were attached to storerooms.
Storerooms.
Can you imagine that? Storerooms filled with material for students and devotees.
Yeah.
What Swami would
and those rooms were bigger than his own bedroom. And his bed, like, in fact, the feeling that I got was, come on, Swami, like, you can't be kidding me. Don't tell me you use this bed, because it's impossible to have had a good sleep on that kind of a bed. You can barely kind of even roll around. It is that small, the bed. I'm sure that, how many devotees must have prayed to Swami to get an opportunity to give him something. And as you mentioned about the fan, he must have said, it's good enough for me. I think that is what we can learn from this life, the great grand life.
As you mentioned about Bhagwan's Parthi home, I'm reminded of Bhagwan's Vrindavan home.
Yes.
Trai Vrindavan. In fact, in this month of April, we have the anniversary of Trai Vrindavan. April 26th, 1984 is when Bhagwan first stepped into this home, which became then a temple. Prior to this, Bhagwan was living in that old bungalow, which came to Bhagwan, which offered to Bhagwan by a senior devotee way back in 1963. And, that building was made in a different way. It was made by Britishers. And the Rajmata of Navanagar was a great devotee, and she had a very beautiful relationship with Swami. She used to always call Swami as Kanha, Kanha. That is how she related to Swami.
Hare Krishna.
Her Krishna, it was for. And she said, Kanha, you have to have, this is not the house, it's not made for you. We have to make a house for you. It's just living somewhere. Some Britisher had made for his needs and requirements. We have to build something which is suiting for you. But Swami said, no, no. So from 1963, she was every year praying to Swami, Swami, please give us this chance.
And this was while the entire organization was being set up.
Yes.
And great grand buildings were otherwise made. Mandirs for Swami were made.
Yeah.
Right?
And Swami never agreed. The whole of 60s went, 70s. Swami said, no.
Not necessary.
No, not necessary. No, this is fine. Like, that's how Bhagawan is. Why we have to make? Finally, after almost 20 years, Swami agrees for the construction of a new building. In fact, today when I think about it, I feel like the building was brought down, old bungalow. Actually, if only Swami had given us this chance, we would have preserved that old bungalow and built this new Trai Vrindavan at a different place, because there are so many memories attached to that old bungalow. Because that was the time when Swami spent so much of his day with the students, from 1969 to 79, it was only students, and every student of that time has a beautiful memory attached to that old bungalow. Any case, Bhagawan gave the permission to, so Swami said you have to bring down that building and construct the new one in the same spot. So when the new construction happened, it happened in a year. And when it came to the interior designing and setting up Bhagawan's room, so the Rajmata was very keen, the engineers are very keen to know which would be Swami's room, so that they will accordingly furnish it and everything. So what they did was, because Bhagawan was very elusive, he would never give any answer, when you ask about these things. So they made a 2D model. At that time you didn't have this 3D modeling software. So they made a 2D model of the various rooms on the first floor of Trai, and which are all tied to a central axis. And Swami can move all these rooms, and Swami can select which would be his room. So Swami looked at that contraption, and he was very excited. He started playing with it. This will come here, this will come here. He started playing with it. For half an hour, he's playing with it. He's not telling which is his room. Swami, we want to know which is here. He didn't give that answer. Now, Rajmata said, forget it. I have to step in. So she decided, this will be the room. And she said, I'm going to get my exquisite collection of fittings for Bhagawan's washroom and bedroom. So she had this gold-plated nozzles, gold-plated taps, and this sophisticated jacuzzi.
Oh my God, a very bad idea with Swami especially.
She got a shower cubicle. Swami saw all that. Swami said, why this gold tap? Water will be any different or what if it comes in this? The bathtub, what do you do in that bathtub? I don't need. What do you put there, Swami said? I don't need all this. So Swami, please, Swami, no, I don't need. Then she didn't give up. She said, finally they settled for the same nickel chromium tap what we have in all usual homes. She didn't give up. She said, no, at least the bedroom, Swami, you need to have a king-size bed. She was from a royal family,
Yeah.
Swami, what you have, it should be the best of the world. You are the king of the world. Swami said, king-size bed? Have you seen my frame? I'm just so small. Why do I need such a big bed? So, Mr. Vimalanathan, the engineer who was there, with tears in his eyes, he was telling me, you have to actually be there to see how, when he said my life is my message, how everything that he did, he really, really lived that life.
Yeah.
There was this one beautiful statement that Swami had told the students as to how they should dress, right? Typically himself being the example. Swami had said, you dress in a manner in which if there is an affluent person, he doesn't hesitate to come and speak to you. But a person who is poor also should be able to come and speak to you.
Exactly the
Right?
point. Yeah.
That balance. And I think that's the balance Swami maintained with his dressing, with his lifestyle. And I recall Professor Venkatraman, when he was discussing, when he was giving a talk to a group which was visiting, he said, if you have any questions, you can ask. And there was this one little boy who wanted to ask a question. And everybody was pulling him down because they kind of knew that this boy was capable of asking some uncomfortable questions. And Sir saw that and he said, no, let him ask. We'll see what he wants to know. So this boy said, sir, if Swami is God, why did he move around in a Mercedes car or a BMW? Right? And there was a hush in the, why do you ask such a question? And Venkatraman sir said, no, it's a very good question. And he said a very beautiful point. He said, Swami is not God because he moved in a car, a BMW or a Mercedes. Swami is God because even without that BMW or Mercedes, he would have been the same. Right? And that's the difference. A little bit of, as you're saying, if there are a few hundred people working around us, our mindset, our body language changes. We had the opportunity to speak to one devotee from Anantapur. And he was saying this very beautiful point. They came to Swami, or Swami came to their house in the 1940s. Swami walked into their house as a little boy wearing dhoti and a shirt. That's how long the association with Swami is. And even when we were students, we have seen him having the opportunity to speak to Swami. So when we spoke to him, we asked him this question. He said, sir, in all your association with Swami, what is that one thing about Swami that you feel stands out? He just paused for a couple of seconds. He said, we know Swami for 50 years. Today when I go to Swami, whole of Prasanthi Nilayam has changed. Big buildings have come. The mandir has become so ornate. But Swami has not changed. He said, when I go to him, I have the sense that it's the same Swami I spoke to, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when he was a little child. So he said, the overwhelming feeling that comes from Swami is, Swami has not changed at all. I think that is the greatest message that Swami gives us through all this. And probably just one last episode which Swami would narrate. In those days, at the end of the birthday celebrations or on birthday, Swami would permit all the devotees to come and garland him. And we've seen those pictures of Swami sitting on a heap of flowers, right? And they would garland Swami and they would take Pad Namaskar. After about a couple of hours, Swami called one of the devotees and Swami told them, see, now if you bow down to my feet, you will get nice fragrance. Right? And Swami said, if there is a person who is a little skeptical about Swami, he would think, see the Sai Baba, he's putting perfume even to his feet. Then Swami said, but it is not the perfume I have put, sir. It is the perfume from the scented oil on your head. But it's a very profound thing that whatever we associate to Swami, with Swami as opulence, it is in our head. Yeah. His feet is simple, right? It is our thing that gets stuck to it.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, as we began this session by sharing how just listening to the name, and one of the beautiful gifts that we have from the Sathya Sai avatar is this Sai Bhagavatam, is the stories about his life, is the stories about how he lived and how we learn from that. And in fact, I remember some time back, there is this youngster who just came into Radio Sai office, and he wanted to get some information about our programs. And I asked him, how long have you known Swami? And he said, just 1 or 2 years. It didn't seem like that because he knew so much. So I said, how did you become a devotee? Okay, he was a youngster from the UP, I think. He said, I became a devotee just by listening to the Samarpan talks and watching the programs that are produced in the media center in Radio Sai. So I feel this is the power of constantly recalling, recounting, reliving these episodes. You don't know what it does to you. In fact, even during these times of COVID, I know of so many people who have derived their strength, their courage to deal with these tough times because of these programs. I know a doctor, he's a district medical officer. He wrote to me almost a year ago saying when he went through COVID, he was able to recover and recover well and recover in time only because during those 14 days when he was in isolation, he was constantly listening to Radio Sai, listening to these programs, watching these talks. And he said, I don't know how to express my gratitude for what you did to me, what all of you, whoever is engaged in Bhagawan's work, what you have done to me to go through this tough time. And I think this is what happens now everywhere. People are in their homes, and there are so many people I know, they cannot sleep unless they have heard something, listened to a talk or heard something that, is
about Swami.
About Swami. You have relived. And I think that is one of the beautiful, it has become the eternal and perennial source of strength for all of us. And that is the power of the stories of the Lord. And as we began, the stories and glories of the Lord, it is unending. And I think into this charitra comes everybody's experience. What we have shared today is only little stories. What we have shared today is only a glimpse of what we have seen of Bhagawan's life and what it has done to so many devotees' lives. And into this sagara, into this ocean comes each one of your experiences, comes each one of your moments, each one of your stories, because something has happened to you when you heard that experience, something has happened to you when you read that story, something has happened to you when you heard that bhajan, something has happened to you when you opened Sathya Sai Speaks and how that gave you the answer, something happened to you when you opened your email and saw the message and Sai Inspires. Something happened to you when you opened Discourse Stream and heard Bhagawan's voice. Something happened to you when you went to Sri Sathya Sai Speaks channel and heard Bhagawan's snippet about how to control the mind or how to serve. And I think let us use all these moments to express our deep sense of gratitude to Bhagawan on this Aradhana day. For thank you, Swami, for taking this form, for filling us with so many beautiful moments. And each moment is so powerful that it can resurrect us, it can wipe away our sorrows in a second and make us completely renewed to again walk on this path of loving you deeply with renewed zeal and enthusiasm. Thank you so much for your time, for your patience, for your love, and we express our gratitude to everyone in Prasanthi Nilayam, in Media Center, and to Bhagawan, of course, who made this possible. Sai Ram.
పలికెడిది సాయి కథయట పలికించు విభుండు సాయి రాముడట మే పలికిన భవహర మగునట పలికెద వేరుండుగాధ పలుకగనేలా మధురం మధురం సాయి కథా నవరస భరితం స్వామి కథా మధురం మధురం సాయి కథా నవరస భరితం స్వామి కథా మధురం మధురం సాయి కథా సకల శుభములను సంపదలొసగి సకల శుభములను సంపదలొసగి సకల పాపముల హరించుగాథా మధురం మధురం సాయి కథా నవరస భరితం స్వామి కథా మధురం మధురం సాయి కథా చిత్రావతియను నదీ తీరమున పుట్టపర్తియను పల్లె సీమలో చిత్రావతియను నదీ తీరమున పుట్టపర్తియను పల్లె సీమలో శ్రీకర దివ్య ప్రభాకర కుల కులజుడు శ్రీకర దివ్య ప్రభాకర కులజుడు రత్నాకర వంశాధి సోముడు రత్నాకర వంశాధి సోముడు పెదవేంకమరాజనే యోగ్యుడు ఈశ్వరాంబను వివాహమాడెను ఈశ్వరాంబను వివాహమాడెను ముందుగా భూసురులాశీర్వదింప ముందుగా భూసురులాశీర్వదింప బంధుమిత్రులానందము చందన మధురం మధురం సాయి కథా నవరస భరితం స్వామి కథా మధురం మధురం సాయి కథా